Hey, it's great to be with you again today. I was having morning devotions and I'm reading this chapter, and Jesus is out, and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the religious elite, the ones who are supposed to be righteous, right, are trying to trap him. They're trying to get him to say something that'll get him in some hot water with either the Romans or the public. And they say to him, so tell us, what are the greatest commandments? And they're hoping he's going to trip, right? And say something really weird. And Jesus says this. He says, hey, the first and greatest commandment is love your Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength. And the second is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And they're like, hey, that's a pretty good answer. Nice job. And then one of the Pharisees says this, because he wants to justify himself, right? So he says, and tell me, who is my neighbor? Now, Jesus can answer 1,000 different ways, right? And they're going to have a problem with it no matter what he says. And he says this. He says, okay, let me tell you a story. Jesus loved to tell stories. And he says, a guy's going down from Jericho to Jerusalem. And he runs into some robbers. And they beat him up. They steal all his money. They beat him half to death. He's bleeding out. He's laying on the side of the road, and they leave him there. And they take off. A little while later, a priest walks up. And you think the priest is going to help him, right? And the priest sees him, and he's like, whew, look at the time. Got to get to synagogue. Walks right past him. A little while later, a Levite, who is a guy who works at the synagogue, right? He works for the priests, and he's a religious dude, and he comes walking by, and he sees him, and he goes, love to help, but man, I'm late for work. Walks right past him. A couple minutes later, a Samaritan walks up. Now, Samaritans and Jews did not get along. Samaritans thought that Jews were kind of like religious snobs, and Jews looked at Samaritans as half-bloods, right? And they didn't get along, and they pointed fingers at each other all the time. And the Samaritan gets off his donkey, and he goes over and he pours oil and wine on the guy to stop the bleeding and to give it as an antiseptic, and he puts him on his donkey, and he rides him into town, and he pulls out a couple silver coins and says to the guy who owns the inn, he says, hey, take care of him. And when I come back, if I owe you more, I'll pay up. And Jesus looks at the Pharisee and he says, tell me this. Which one of those guys was his neighbor? And the Pharisee looked at him and he says, the one who helped him. He couldn't even say the word Samaritan because he disliked the Samaritans so much. And Jesus says, well, there you have it. That's who your neighbors are. Go and do the same. Go and do the same, right? We may not like everybody. We may have differences of opinions. Democrat, Republican, different ethnic groups, diverse, right? We're all over the place. We may not see eye to eye. And you know what? God says this. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Because when you do that, you honor God. Because we are all created in God's image. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. May God continue to pour out his grace, mercy, and blessings on each and every one of us until we meet again. Amen? Amen.